9 to 5 in a job that we hate, molding our minds to serve food on a plate. Wasting our time asking who's to blame. Rush pain claims this is not what we came to the city that says. My mom would always say you are what you make, but the money I made as a bed-wage slave with my own bathtub babe. It's a shot to the grave, a tombstone that says what a beautiful waste of what could have been.
You've described the strikers in the UK miners' strike of 84, 85, and those the Yorkshire villages, and their communities. You talk about how basically they were organizing perfectly according to principles of mutual aid or anarchist communist principles.
Yes.
Could you speak on that? Could you speak on that briefly?
I'll do my best. When the strike took place, most of the villages, most of the Yorkshire coal mines, and you understand that, just like if you're from Kentucky and comrades listening to the show and all the lumpens and the crazes out there who we love and respect know that. They know that often around the coal mine pit, there are villages where most of the miners and their families live. Some live outside of it, but a lot of them are very much of a community. There's an inherited shared community. I grew up in it, There were people you hated and fought with every weekend. You tried to throw bricks at police cars, you did all sorts of things. You knew people, you liked people, you disliked people. When the strike came out in Yorkshire, when it broke out, and it was, I think, realistically driven, by the Yorkshire comrades, Yorkshire miners, nearly all those villages were behind it. And the strike dragged on. You understand that there were scabs around, and there were scabs in other areas, but the strike dragged on, and people remained solid. Obviously, money became a problem. And there were people throughout England and Scotland, Ireland, Wales, throughout Europe, who were sending money, sending clothes, sending food to these villages. And it would arrive, and every week there would be what we called a divvying up, sharing up. The people who divvied it up would change every so often, so it couldn't become a permanent group, because that's got its own dangers. And there were certain unwritten rules. So, for instance, if you were a couple with 3 or 4 children, you got more than if you were a bachelor living on your own.
Sure.
If you had dependents, you had more money. If your mum was ill, if your dad was ill, if there was a problem in your family, more money or more food would go to you than if you were a young couple. If your partner was pregnant, more money would come in that way. So it was quite carefully thought out and worked, and it was no more than mutual aid. From each according to their ability to each according to their need. And for those people who wanted to read Kropotkin, you didn't need to, you could see it there. Oh, it was ungainly and messy and wasn't run on anarchist lines. People would shout and scream and have arguments, but all in all, it was a marvelous thing to see. Marvelous. Seeing people who you'd never dream of, just suddenly kicking into that type of behavior, what Colin Ward called the seas beneath the snow, I think, was a marvelous thing. The interesting thing, the interesting aspect of it all for me, is that it came in a time of sort of attack. We were on the defensive, We had to, people had to survive, keep going during this strike. It didn't last. It wasn't an offensive action. And it seems to me one of the things that we might want to talk about one day as anarchists is that there are examples of anarchist practice, often carried out by people who have no idea who Kropotkin is, or Emma Goldman is, or Voltaire de Cleyre, or, Di Giovanni, or anybody, whoever these people are, they've no idea. But they just carry it out instinctively. And it seems to me they're wonderful things to see. And there was that rather strange book called Orgasms of History that tried to show that. It seems to me the question is, when can we carry this on? When can we extend it? Or is it simply a natural reflexive defensive action in struggle that's then lost? Because it didn't last long beyond the strike. Of course, there were all sorts of other things. One was the prominent role of working class women. I mean, just out of this bloody world, organising, arguing, fighting, just power and strength and conviction and courage that you could cry if you actually saw it and saw the aftermath of the strike as well. They found a voice. They sat at meetings and they took part and they argued and won their case at times. Sometimes they'd be the ones on the picket lines because half the other miners were in prison. Half the miners were in prison, so partners and comrades would come along and stand there, and wives, old, middle-aged, young, screaming insults at the police. Marvelous to see. But again, temporary. It doesn't last. Now, it may well be that they never will last. That, those great events in Chicago or in Buenos Aires or in Spain in '39, they don't last. Maybe they'll never come back. But if there was, and maybe it's silly for anarchists to talk of permanence, but there's something so rich and beautiful in events like those, that if there was some way that we could keep renewing and refreshing them, what a better world it would be than the one we've got now.
It's a catch-22 because you see mutual aid and basically the principles of libertarian communism whenever you see disasters.
Yeah,
or whenever you see
at times when you see contestation, when you see, working class communities usually taking on the state in some way. And the other thing is that although we might see it in our own anarchist culture, we have to remember that many of the times when you see it, even in the Peasants' Revolt in England, say, I mean, we can go through hundreds of examples, they tend to be very community-based and centered on geographical areas where people have grown up knowing each other, their strengths and their weaknesses even. And it's for anarchists, and here's the try not to end on a sour note, but a problem. You heard me talk about David Douglas. David Douglas has been an anarchist, for the last 30 years of his life, probably. I don't know. He'd argue more or less. I'm not sure. He's written three more. I mean, the three memoirs that David's written, Coal Dust and Starlight series. I mean, they are beyond beautiful. They're awkward. They're messy, just like life. And his last book, which is about the coal mining villages, is called Ghost Dancers, because like those Indians before the time of Wounded Knee, there was little left, and they were looking for help, and they were keeping the spirit alive. And that's what coal miners were doing, and their families and their communities. And we're ghost dancers now, all of those who have experienced that. We know, we've seen it, we know it, and we've seen it disappear and be destroyed by the state. And so, but that's something to be sad about. But David was part of that community all his life, so were other people. Anarchists lived and worked and drank and ate and fought and argued in those communities. They did it in the coalfields, they did it in northern working class towns in England, and then they did it, of course, in Barcelona. They did it in, wherever there's been a sizable, intense movement against capital and against the state that anarchists have been involved in. If it's been a sizable one, i.e. big, it means often that they've been based in those communities where they've lived and worked. They're not apart from it. They may have our own meetings. We may have our own meetings. We may set up theatre groups and drinks and parties and sing-alongs and target practices the Chicago anarchists did. But we also spent our days talking with people who were doing the same things that we did and came from those same communities. The anarchist community in those periods of time, in the 80s, 84, but going back to Spain and beyond, were welcoming communities. You didn't have to be pure and perfect to join or to become part of an anarchist idea. You didn't have to be a fully grown anarchist and pass the social test because you wore the same fucking duffel coat as everyone else did or listened to the same music. But I certainly think it's a bit exclusive. And I think like in all relatively smallish movements, there are people in it who don't really want it to get much bigger because their whole raison d'etre would disappear.
Right.
Look, you know, what we want, surely. I mean, this is a country, where was it 1% of the population earns 24% of the wealth? Or something I read the other day? Now, this is a country that we don't want that to be happening. We don't want people having bloody rickets in working class areas and poor areas. We don't want people starving and going to food banks whilst bankers just get wealthier. We want everyone to share. Our ideas aren't meant for us, they're for everybody. Now, I admit there may be comrades in our movement who think, well, you know, the revolution is never going to become, that's leftist. Well, it may well be. That may well be. You all right? I don't know. Certainly there's a sadness in my life because my generation is mega cocked up. But if it's not going to come, you know, then I guess we can just write our articles and be clever and witty and pithy and just, you know, write to each other. And I wonder how much of what passes for anarchist propaganda is actually just written to other anarchists. You know, I got a note the other day, and some comrade had got into trouble, and we were sending money. And we realized, a few of us, that we're this little group of people who haven't got a lot of money, but we'll always try and give it. Same people. When I read anarchist newspapers, I think, who's this written for? Is this written for, like, the person who Matt Cavanagh's chatted about, or Kate Austin chatted to? You know, Kate Austin would have a meeting at her house in Missouri when Emma Goldman would come and speak, and other farmers would come and listen to her. Well, who are our magazines talking to? Who are our newspapers talking to? Who are the internet talking to? You know, all those asinine comments that come at the end of every bloody article, you know, with people ragging and slagging on each other. Well, you know, you're a person who's vaguely interested in anarchism. You read that, fuck that, I'm just going to go and watch the television. You know, who are we talking to anymore? I think I'm more and more, as getting interested in history, I'm really becoming interested in that whole area where the language of anarchism hits the language of everyday life. That's what fascinates me. And what fascinates me are those comrades who spent their life in that area. You know, I'm not too interested in those comrades who just wrote for other comrades anymore. I'm interested in those people who try to explain anarchism in the language of everyday practical experience. And I think that if we can do that, if we can begin to do that, and that'll be hard, you know, because we'll have to speak to people who don't really like punk music at all and think it's a waste of time. You know, it's just like fucking noise. And come on, you know, Tom Jones and all that, you know, but we will have to speak to people like that. And we'll have to speak to people who are not nice to us when we were at school. And we'll have to talk to people who laugh at us and mock at us and think we're really stupid. Sure. And we will have to look at our history and say, Paris 68, was it the end of something or the beginning of something? Seattle, was it the end of something or the beginning of something? And every time we have contestation in the streets, yeah, okay. And then what happens when it's over? Are we back representing and working with communities?
9 to 5.